I'm here today with special guest Haley Newlin, author of the novels Take Your Turn, Teddy and Not Another Sarah Halls, as well as many acclaimed short stories. She's also a book reviewer for Cemetery Dance magazine, and she is hard at work on her upcoming release, The Film You Are About to See. Welcome, Haley.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I know that was kind of a brief introduction, so please tell me what I missed.
No, that was perfect. I'm just noticing that my Zoom says Newlin twins because I do twins in talent with my sister.
Mhm.
But no, that was great.
All right. Well, can we start off talking about kind of what first got you interested in writing and then why horror?
Yeah. So I started writing when I was super young. I have an identical twin sister named Hannah, and when we were growing up, we lived in kind of rural Indiana, and there was always just these like terrible, like violent thunderstorms.
Mhm.
And she was so afraid. We'd always go down to the basement and she would just be so afraid. So Hannah was really afraid of these storms. We go down into the basement and she would just almost have like these little panic attacks, so young. And I would try to make her laugh. I would try to like talk with her to distract her, and nothing really worked until one day I was just like, okay, well, let's make up a story. And so I started to write this little story about an egg that I called Baby Egg, who had to save everybody in the kitchen. And it was this whole comic strip. And then he met like this terrible demise one day because the mother rolls him off the counter. And like I had this whole strip by the end of it. And it was just like 15 little different adventures that Baby Egg went on. And it became kind of like my thing after that. Like I saw kind of the power of writing, I think, that I was able to comfort somebody. What's so funny about that is now I write horror. So, but I still think horror can be incredibly comforting.
I totally agree with that. I think people think of horror as something only to scare you. It's also something to like escape, which can be very
Yes.
comforting, as you
Yeah.
found.
Yeah. And then I got into horror from Stephen King's It. So I was probably way too young to be reading it. I think I was about 13 when I got it from the public library. And I think it was a pretty drastic shift from a series of unfortunate events where it was like kind of spooky and moody. And I knew I was into like kind of the like humor about the dark things. But then I read it and it terrified the hell out of me for sure. But I think what I found so satisfying about the ending was that we get to know each of the character really well through what they're afraid of and kind of how Pennywise targets them specifically. And I was so fascinated by the fact that beating Pennywise wasn't just this one clear answer, it was all of them having to face their big bads. And so that's when I realized that that horror is so reflective. Like it makes us look at ourselves and say, how would I beat Pennywise? What would Pennywise show me? How would I get the upper hand in this? And so that's both terrifying, but I also think horror kind of allowed me to go on this like reflective journey that some people don't hit until they're almost 30 years old. I started to really kind of look inward, and I was able to identify anxieties in a time where we weren't talking about anxiety. And I think horror gave me that.
That is a fantastic answer. Wow, I,
Thank
I
you.
love that. Also, I just noticed you have a Pennywise behind you.
Yes.
I have a Pennywise mask around here somewhere. Yeah, I also read it probably when I was way too young, and I saw the original like Tim Curry movie, which is my favorite childhood movie. So yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Like I don't know if I'm the only one. I was like crying at the end of it because I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like the friendships they formed. It was so great.
Yeah. My mother is hilarious because she's always so worried about health or whatever. And she's like, are they doing like a blood bond? Like, don't you ever do that? It was just like, that's all she got from me watching it. Not, okay, now that might have been a little scary for you or something like that. She was just so concerned about that. But I loved the Tim Curry one too. Or sorry, I should say I love the Tim Curry one and the 2017 release too. I liked Tim Curry so much in that role because I think if like someone like William Castle went and directed it, it would be more like the Tim Curry role, where other movies and other books kind of really leaned into like suspense and that kind of quiet dread.
Mhm.
William Castle would go campy, and that's kind of how this Tim Curry was. He was a lot campier, I think, than the new clown or the new portrayal of Pennywise. So
Yeah.
that's a great early film, like to get into horror.
It is, and it's also a great transition into talking about your upcoming release, which is called The Film You Are About to See. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yes, so it's so interesting that William Castle came to mind for me when we were talking about Pennywise, because William Castle is totally the reason behind this book. The film you are about to see came from my love of William Castle, specifically his collaborations with Vincent Price. And again, it was that same thing. I think I saw Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, before I saw any of William Castle's films. And so I had this kind of like, okay, now we're going to lean psychological and we're going to be really suspenseful and that kind of thing. You know, it's like crime and then, but when you get to William Castle movies, again, where other movies would do suspenseful and kind of this dark, like dread, that's where he's going to have the most fun. Is when things are about to really happen, people are dying. That's when it's going to get the most campy for him. And I was so thrilled by that. I was like, wait, you can have fun with this? Like, you know, because I went through scaring the hell out of myself reading all the great Stephen King books and Shirley Jackson books after I read my first horror book. And then William Castle kind of reminded young me, who was like, what have I gotten myself into? This is traumatizing. William Castle reminded young me that there is so much fun in this too. And it can be a really cool way to navigate some kind of icky, tough emotions, but in a really safe space. Like, and I think that's why for a lot of us, horror is actually very helpful in easing anxiety.
Mhm.
So, all of that to say, I had this idea for the film you were about to see for a long time. And it basically just came from a dream of mine where I always wanted to host a drive in, like a night at a drive in, a local drive in. And I
Cool.
wanted to have all my friends, and I wanted people from the Books of Horror community and all my horror friends to come to this drive in. And I would get to show them these incredible horror movies that some people have just missed. You know, some people don't even know. And so I wanted to show them how much fun these movies were, how intelligent they were in playing with shadows and streams and pulleys. And it was so much fun to see what all they go through to make things actually happen in these old movies. It was so much more theatrical, you know, like a stage play. And I love that. So I thought, okay, well, I'm probably not going to rent out a drive in and show all these people these movies. And I thought, what if I made a story where I have that very thing? It's the movies I would show at a drive in, and it's dusk till dawn because I couldn't pick between like I got to seven, I think, movies, so it's a dusk till dawn. And so I thought, what if I took all that really campy fun and not only just had it up on screen, but had readers experiencing it along with the audience. And so that was really cool for me because I got to play with not only those specific movies, but kind of like horror as it was in the 1950s. And that was just a blast to me. So I started writing like 3,000 words of it and just took off.
That sounds so awesome. And also, I would totally go to that. So if that ever ends up happening, which I really hope it does, I'm there.
Oh
But
my
can you
gosh,
tell
thank
us
you.
some of the movies? If you can't remember all seven, that's fine. But I'm just curious what your top seven are.
No, that's amazing. I actually wrote them down in case you asked me.
Right.
So the first one is The Blob. And The Blob I actually didn't see until recently. I hadn't seen it for a long time. So when I was writing the original early chapters of this, The Blob wasn't included on the marquee. And so that's something I kept thinking. I kept picturing the marquee and thinking, okay, what movies would be on there? And I would just be giddy, like, oh my gosh, they're playing The Blob. And so I really like The Blob because it has that really fun, like old graphics and things that would come up for horror movies where it's like, it's big, it's coming, it's the blob. And I do that with the film you are about to see on the cover that's going to be revealed this Friday.
Ooh,
It has this little bit and it says, is it man? Is it monster? The truth may be too terrifying to know. And I love that. It's so campy and you can just tell that the people are having so much fun with it. So the blob for sure. Also because I think it reflects a lot of the fears in the 1950s that, you know, really define 50s horror. And then you have, you know, things that define 60s. And sorry, I'm going on a tangent there. I think
it's
that's
interesting. Keep
fascinating.
going. Bring it on.
Thank you. I think it's so fascinating to study horror. And I know that sounds so nerdy to study horror through each decade. So, like, instead of just watching an oldies occasion, an oldie occasionally, like, someone might throw on Psycho and then they're going and watching only movies that come out in 2025. I think it's really interesting to say, okay, I'm going to watch Psycho. What else came out in the 1960s? Oh, okay, did this actor get their start here in horror or things like that? Because I didn't even know like Christopher Lee started in horror. I didn't
Mhm.
know that until I was in my teens. Like, and I'd already seen him in Star Wars and Willy Wonka or Charlie and Chocolate Factory, things like that. And so there's just all these little cool things to grab from it. And in The Blob, it was so much about the fear of the cosmos and the fear of something bigger than us and science fiction or science ruining everything and someone too powerful with the science. And so that was the reason I decided to include The Blob. And then the next one is House of Wax, 1953. And I have to argue this one all the time because I'll say House of Wax and people say, oh, with Chad Michael Murray and is it
Mhm.
Jared Padalecki? And I'm like, no. And I watched that movie and I to this day I say that is not Paris Hilton's fault. People will say, yeah, that one with Paris Hilton. I'm like, she did what she was hired to do. She was fine. That movie, it frustrated me. If it would have been called something else, I might have enjoyed it more. But
Fair.
yeah,
I actually love that movie
I'm
unapologetically.
so sorry. I'm sending you love
No
too.
offense taken whatsoever.
And you know what? That actually happens a lot. But I think for me, it was just so much where this was another film that I loved so much, and people would only watch the version that came out, in the 2000s or whatever. And I don't
Mhm.
even know if it's necessarily meant to be like it wasn't meant to be an exact redo of the one in the 50s. But it was just this thing where I would bring it up and I was so ready to talk about Vincent Price's performance in it and just how maniacal he is. And there's so many cool oldies horror things. Like you're in the morgue and you see the bodies with the toe tags, and then bodies are coming up while they're under the sheets. Like it's so much fun. It's so much fun. And so that was kind of like where I was a little hesitant on the new House of Wax. So I think when I'm going back and I'm restudying like early 2000s, like that decade, if I get there, um, I'll rewatch that. I'll give it another chance. But I wanted
Mhm.
to clarify that anyone who says it's Paris Hilton's fault, that's dumb. It's not her fault. I'm sorry, I'm analyzing every movie instead of just giving you my list.
No,
So
I love the analysis. Like that's why we're here. And for the record, I do
okay.
not think it is nerdy to go by the decades. I actually took a class in college where that's exactly what we did. We went
Oh,
started at
that's
the
awesome.
50s and went through the decades, watched movies, read articles. So I love this kind of stuff. So I'm
That's
very happy we're
awesome.
talking about it.
Thank you. That's so cool. And I think I'm always hesitant to go into these deep dives into these horror movies because other than like going to conventions and book signings and things like that, horror in my area is not super popular.
Same.
Um yeah, and so you kind of feel like you can see people's like eyes kind of glaze over or they immediately just go to, "Oh, I don't like horror."
Mhm.
So sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, am I going on too long with people who want me to be done? But I remember where I'm at now. So The Blob, House of Wax, and then the movie that really inspired it all is The Tingler. William Castle's The Tingler, starring Vincent Price. That one, I loved the fact, I just love the idea of studying fear as like this tangible thing that could be attached to your spine. And I loved that. That was so creative. Like it's spine tingling, it's spine chilling, and and it's literally this kind of bug creature manifestation that grows on your spine when you're afraid. And that was so cool to me. It was also another chance for the 50s era to use a scientist who took things a little bit too far. Science was very scary in the 50s after, the atomic age, and we had a lot of technology developing then. And people were so afraid of things like that. And so you take this guy who otherwise seems very good, very gentle. He doesn't have a great marriage, but you still kind of like you're with him. You see the struggle and you're like, oh, he's unfortunate. That's unfortunate for him. But by the end of it, you're like, holy shit. So he was willing to almost kill his wife, like all these crazy things in the name of science. And there's this fantastic line he says in that movie where he says, science can be frighteningly impersonal. And I think about that all the time. Like just how good of a blanket statement is that to like describe that era. And now,
That's super
so
cool.
much now. Yeah.
And
So
correct me if I'm wrong about the Tingler, but so William Castle, he also did House on Haunted Hill, the original.
Yes.
And I know that he was pretty famous for the gimmicks he did while he was showing it. So, you'd have the thing fly through the movie theater while that was happening. Did he
Yeah.
want to do something for the Tingler and he wasn't able to do it, or did he actually do something for the Tingler?
Okay, so the Tingler is actually one of his most famous, but it's weird because I think House on Haunted Hill is somehow a lot more popular. And it's a great movie too, but yeah, The Tingler is one that I find a lot of people haven't seen or hadn't until I got really into the horror community. And in the film you're about to see, I'll just give this little bit away. I use some inspiration from The Tingler. It's not just the movie on screen, but the movies kind of become part of the plot, become part of what goes wrong and what makes the chaos at the drive-in. And I have this clairvoyant character, and she is literally like enjoying the gimmicks, and she's like, "Wait, is this not a gimmick anymore?" And I love playing with that kind of like, yeah. Anyway, it's called Percepto. And so for Percepto, that was his vibrating trick. And so what he would do is he would put these little, I don't even know what they were. I'll have to look, but like these little things under people's seats. And so then when the tingler was coming out, and it would vibrate really hard, and it was almost supposed to mimic like the tingler crawling up your spine. And I just think how terrifying that would have been in the 50s when horror was kind of just becoming a little bit more mainstream. Most horror was B movies. And so for an audience to kind of be drawn to that, it invited people who weren't watching horror at the time, who hadn't seen Cat People from the 40s or Shock or things like that. And that is so freaking powerful to me because even if that person hated that experience, it was an experience. You didn't just sit down and watch a movie, you were experiencing it with everybody there. And I
Mhm.
think that that is what made William Castle so like meaningful to the horror genres. He reminded us that it's such a collective experience despite it being so individualized.
Totally. And it's so creative. I feel like he
Yes,
was
so
way ahead of his
creative.
time because even now you can go places and they have like the 4D movie theaters with little
Right.
gimmicks like that. But I think
Yeah.
people don't realize, people have been doing this for a long time. And I love that horror was kind of the emphasis and the impetus for all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in my book, The Film You're About to See, I also use another one of his gimmicks where he stationed nurses at the back of theaters, or like off to the side. People would go find a parking spot, and there would be a hearse parked outside, like just all these cool things, like to imply that you can't handle this movie, like it's going to be too much. And when I pitched this story to my wonderful publisher, Maddox Media, I had the story and everything, but I didn't have a title. And somehow, like, I didn't communicate that. I totally forgot to say it. And so we're in the meeting, like, about to sign the contract. And they're like, "So what's your title?" On the spot, I think of just that one image that comes to mind for me when I think of William Castle, and it's his introductions. The introductions he did to movies, they are so theatrical. And he's like, "Now the person next to you may be screaming, and you'll want to scream as well," and things like this. And he just gives these little warnings. And so he would say, "The terror you're going to see on this projector behind me, or the terror you're about to see in this film." So it came to me, The Film You Are About to See. And I just thought that that was so cool. Came up with it on the spot, and I'm still so happy with it.
It's a perfect title, honestly. That's so surprising that you came up with that because I thought, oh, this seems like one where the title came and then, or they came together. That's really
Yeah.
cool that you came with it on the spot. Would not have guessed.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of my go-to with naming titles is I try not to give a lot of thought to the words of the title specifically. I just kind of try to create these images in my head that come up when I'm trying to think of the concept of the story. So for Take Your Turn Teddy, I had that title before I had any of the story,
Mm.
which was crazy. I just knew I had a young protagonist, and that was it. So I'm sorry. So the Tingler. And then my next one is also William Castle, Vincent Price, House on Haunted Hill, which
Yes,
we were
yes.
just speaking about. And that one has a lot of fun gimmicks too. I know that when they showed that, I think, I'm trying to remember because The Tingler came out in '59. Trying to remember when House on Haunted Hill did. Um, it might have come out the
Might have been
same year.
before that or the same year. Yeah, they were really close
Yeah,
together.
I think it was like a December and July. You'd be surprised how many Vincent Price movies were like came out consecutively, like within months of each other. But anyway, so I think that was actually the first time that he used kind of more like of the pulleys and switches and things like that. You know, in the Tingler, they kind of use like a little pulley to drag the creature across the theater, which is so much fun. And you know, they tell everybody to scream for your lives. And in House on Haunted Hill, it's a little bit quieter at first. Like, you know, it's not there's not something immediately encouraging you to scream, but it has that same opening where there's this introduction, and then there's Vincent Price who comes on screen and kind of tells you like there's something maybe menacing about each of these guests in this house that you're going to be staying in. But then it immediately cuts away to just screaming, just these loud screams, and it's obnoxious. I'll even be watching them, and like my boyfriend will be in the kitchen and he's like, Jesus. I'm like, sorry, I'll turn that part down or I'll mute it or something because all my dogs will bark. And I just think, oh my God, how effective is that to use in the 1950s? Like, put yourself in that place. And that's real. That's the thing you have to do when you're studying film through the decades. Put yourself in that place. Imagine you didn't have all this other knowledge of horror as best as you can, and let yourself experience it as somebody would have back then. And these old movies just hit so hard. They're so satisfying sometimes and so much fun.
That's a good point. And that's really hard to do because I feel like in my mind, I see like A24 films or like James Wan
Yes.
films. And then you look at something like that and you're like, that's not even scary. How were people ever scared of
Yeah,
that? It's so hard to erase what you've already seen.
exactly. Exactly. And I think even though we're talking about oldies horror, I think Pennywise really unlocked that ability for me because it reminded me that, okay, I'm not in the situation running for my life. I'm not thinking about this grief as I'm trying to save myself or something like that. And so it makes me a little bit more able to accept things. Also,
Mhm.
Shirley Jackson was a big advocate in suspending your disbelief. Like she said
Mhm.
so much, like you can't really connect with people in story unless you suspend your disbeliefs because sometimes they're not as logical as we think, but deeply personal.
Totally.
So I think it is a challenge for sure, but I do think if you can get in that headspace or at least remind yourself, it's really helpful.
Mhm.
Um, so House on Haunted Hill, and then the next one is Shock, which is also starring Vincent Price. Shock is a 1940s film. It is actually Vincent Price's first starring film.
Mm.
Yes, so you got babyface Vincent Price. I think he's totally smooth. We don't have any facial hair in that movie, which is, you know, he's always got like a little mustache or
Yep.
yeah,
Love that little
little
mustache.
something. Yeah, and I think he's clean, clean shaven in this movie, which is I think makes the performance all the more powerful because we kind of see him middle aged and older in his best, most memorable performances, and so it's almost like seeing another actor because he's so young and he's not so into like the Roger Corman and Edgar Allan Poe and things like that. He's a true noir actor in this setting. He's very much like the good guy, and things just get kind of confusing and life gets a little hard, and it's almost more like Hitchcockian versus William Castle. And so it's really cool to see him in suspense and then in pure horror and then in like gothic horror, and you realize Vincent Price has acted through so many tropes and so many different horror settings that you can learn about all the different kinds of horror just through his career.
Yeah, no, I love Vincent Price. And when I was in college, you could see all the old Vincent Price movies on Netflix. And now
Yes.
I don't even know where do people watch them?
Right. It's so hard. So I know like people are trying not to support Amazon right now, and I totally hear you. Um but you know, the world is hard. If you want to treat yourself, you can buy some of his movies on Amazon. And I know that sounds like, well, you have to pay for the movie, things like that. But I found it to be so worth it. I don't own
Mhm.
every single one, but like I have The Tingler and House of Wax. And there are times when those are not streaming. You know, I have an app
Yeah.
on my phone that will tell me which apps it's streaming on. And sometimes it just says not streaming.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't seen Shock in a long time, but I think it's on Tubi right now. And it's they're always some obscure place like
Mhm.
Tubi, Fubo, Pluto, you know, something like that. And yeah, I wish they were more readily available on
Mhm.
Max and on Hulu and things like that. And I know there are some right now, but yeah, that's my whole point is people don't always get the opportunity to stumble on these movies. So that's why we have to keep talking about them.
Yeah, because it definitely adds to the mystique. They're not readily available. You have to go searching for them, which means you have to know that they even exist first, which is hard.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so I'll say things about Vincent Price, and people are like, "You didn't know that?" And I'm like, "Well, not until I was 20, and was really only talking to people in horror, things like that." And like Vincent Price showed me Elvira, which is
Love
opposite
Elvin.
for some people. Like some younger people, they know Elvira and then Vincent Price because of it. I
Hmm.
had a friend whose daughter just read Elvira's memoir, and so she didn't know who Vincent Price was. And then she got to hear it through Elvira, who, talks about her first movie she ever saw in theater was House on Haunted Hill. And now she wants to go and watch every single Vincent Price movie. And like, it's so amazing. That's so cool. And
Totally.
so I think we just have to keep advocating for the good the good Vincent Price movies and his mustache and his velvet little like blazers he wore and things like that. It's
Yeah.
not just aesthetic, it's style. And like I said, it's comedic, but he just shows so much mastery in the genre because of his range.
He does have a ton of range, and they're also just so much fun. I mean,
Yes.
some horror is really serious, which is great. Everything has its place, but sometimes you just want something fun.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then my last two films, number 6 and 7, right? Am I counting correctly?
Yes,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
number
so.
6 and 7.
Okay, number 6 is also from the 40s, Cat People.
I have not seen that one, but I've wanted to.
So Cat People was really interesting for me because it almost felt that it came out a bit later than it did,
Mm.
and not by the effects, certainly not by the effects. At one point, I'm pretty sure you see like a stuffed panther that's like the size of like a beagle instead of a panther, and it just goes flying across the room. And so not for that by any means, but it wasn't until the 60s really that people started talking about what went on in mental hospitals and mental institutions and the treatment of these people. And men didn't like that, scientists didn't like that. And so that was a time where you should be afraid if you were, experiencing deep sadness or trauma or something like that, because people around you didn't see you as someone suffering. They saw you as kind of this insufferable being that was a problem that was in the way. And it was so easy back then, so easy for a husband, a brother, a father to send a woman away. And so this whole time you're watching Cat People, they kind of want you to dislike the main character a little bit. And for a second you do.
Mm.
But then you're like, okay, she's telling these people these things are happening. She's telling the truth. She's warning these people. And she's immediately threat with this doctor who's so inappropriate, and her husband think about sending her away. They start kind of threatening her with it very casually. Like it's just a very casual option. And that's why that film is so interesting to me, is because I don't want to ruin the ending for you, but you see her fight against that. And I thought that was
Mm.
really compelling for the 1940s. I mean, how many old movies do we just see them shut up in a van and then they go away? Like, you actually get to
Mm.
see her kind of fight against that. And so, in its own weird way, it's kind of about women's liberation, which you wouldn't probably notice unless you were looking through it in a feminist lens. And I had the pleasure of someone suggesting that I do that. So, totally check it out. And then the last one is totally a film that would not have been played at the drive-in at this time. And it is called Curse of the Demon. And
Hmm.
it's actually a British movie. And the reason it wouldn't have been played at the drive-in was because it didn't premiere in the United States for a long time. Like I think it was a full 2 years before it came over to the United States. And so they wouldn't have had the film reel of it back then. And so I thought of not including it at all. But the whole thing came from my idea of me getting to host my own movie night at the drive-in. And so I thought we can suspend disbelief there. We can just include the movies I want to include. So they all
Yeah.
take place in the 50s. They all do. But some of them it might have been a little hard to track down the film reel. But Curse of the Demon is really cool because it has that noir kind of style, like that mystery,
Mm.
suspenseful style. But then there's actually a creature, which
Hmm.
kind of throws you. So it's really interesting to watch movies like Shock and then The Tingler, and then Curse the Demon, which kind of combines the two. You have that grim, that kind of stylish suspense, and then you actually have this goofy looking monster at the same time. And so I just think that movie is a ton of fun. It actually has like a pretty wicked death at the end too, that I was like, okay, well there they go. So it's definitely worth the watch.
Is it a Hammer horror film by chance?
I see, I wonder that. It could be, but I don't recognize any of the actors off the top of my
Mhm.
head. And so if it wasn't, it should be studied along with them. Like it definitely would fit. And it's black and white. I guess I should have said that. It was important to me to include some black and white movies too, because that's just a vibe sometimes. It's so cool.
Okay, I really want to just have this movie marathon because it sounds awesome. And a couple of those I've seen, but most of them I haven't. And I feel woefully that I've neglected my education here.
No, I think it's just like you said, we don't know to go looking for these movies. It's not like they're coming up on your, you can search the horror genre in alphabetical order on some of these apps and never come across these movies.
Which is such a travesty. It really is that you used to. Like that's how I found all the low
Yeah,
Vincent Price movies. Netflix would be like, look at these. And I was like, yay.
yeah,
Not so much
yeah.
anymore.
No,
Hmm.
nope. It's sad.
Well, you mentioned that your book takes place in the 50s, is that right?
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about was it challenging to write historical horror? I know it's not that far in the past, but still, like I'm sure you had to do a lot of research for that.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of research, and I didn't realize that I wrote period pieces until recently. The publisher that I'm working with, Maddox Media, and the man who runs it, Joey Powell, who's just amazing. He did a podcast with me, and he said, I really trusted Haley with this story, even as it was developing, because she writes period pieces. That's kind of her thing. And I'm like, no, it's not. What? And then I kind of flip back through my writing, and it's okay. The Butcher and Blue Jay Way, one of my short stories, that's early 1900s. I have the novel after this one that takes place in the 1940s. Take Your Turn, Teddy is the 1970s. And so
Hmm.
I do. And I think it's because I can't write without research. I
Hmm.
need to really, to me, I guess it's like what fantasy authors do. I really
Hmm.
have to build the world. And it's almost like learning another language. You have your character make these decisions and think, oh yeah, we know that because we're informed of like serial killers of the 70s or things like that. That wasn't a thing or not a big thing in the 50s. It was harder for that news, even though there were killers in the 50s, it was harder for that news to reach national level. And so I think that gave me a lot of freedom working in the 1950s. Um, but I also wanted to include kind of a psycho killer element. And what's
Hmm.
interesting about that is that's not a very 50s vibe. We didn't really start seeing that until the 60s. And
Hmm.
so I had the original idea of taking the 1950s, using the 1950s as the settings, as kind of the rules of my character, but then the actual horror element is informed by other decades, like the 1960s. And
Oh,
so that to me was like, okay, we're exposing these people who have even seen blood and death and things through horror. We're showing them a horror that they've never seen. And so that was so much fun to me because I got to take the creature feature and I got to take, the psycho killer, like slasher thing. And so it was really cool to take the 50s era and their fears of the atomic age and, science going too far in technology, but then kind of influencing them on things from the 60s and 70s that would later become a big thing in horror.
that sounds so cool. Like
Oh, thank
just
you.
so awesome. And yeah, I have a book coming out next week that's set in the late 1700s.
It looks
And
amazing, by the way.
thank
Sorry.
you. Well, thank you. I mean, but it was like a challenge to write that way because, like you said, I mean, well, nobody who is alive now reading the book was alive then, so I'm not going to get that kind of
Yeah.
critique. But things like were buckets made out of metal or wood? Glass was really
Yes.
expensive, so I got to account for that. Like any even like turns of phrase, I would was looking at
Yes.
the etymology of everything, being like, is this a phrase that they used back then? And
Yeah.
yes, I can say in some ways it gives you freedom, but in other ways you have to think in a completely different way.
Yeah. See, I think you just convinced me that I believe the other thing, that it's a little bit more confining. But I like that challenge. I do. And I
Mhm.
think it also this is gonna be either poetic or nerdy as hell. I think it makes us understand people a lot better because we think of things from the 1950s and the 1960s, 70s, whatever, and we think how and why, and they're so stupid, and all of these things that come up when we're watching horror movies, and it's like you have to remember they only had the information that they had. They
Mhm.
only had the experiences that they had, and so I think a really cool resource or a really interesting part of research for me writing in the 1950s was I just became like a sponge to anything 1950s, to music from the 1950s, even though I prefer the 60s. And I watched as many horror films as I could from the 1950s. Some of them were really, really bad. And some of them really were, just like today, like some of them were
Mhm.
awful. And then others were such pleasant surprises. And that helped me a lot was just kind of going through the 1950s films, going through music, and you kind of start to hear these phrases that would be repeated or like these kind of like happy-go-lucky things people said to each other, um, and things like that. And it also really helped me highlight repeating fears or common fears that kind of came up even through like a love song or something. I'm like, okay, people were really afraid of the world ending in the 1950s. Like that was a big thing. And we're kind of seeing that now. There's, Die with a Smile by Lady Gaga and End of the World by Miley Cyrus. So every so often we kind of get this like the world is ending big thing. And so it was really interesting to study that in the 1950s.
That is super cool. Yeah, actually, the thing I'm working on right now is set in like the early 60s and like the early 70s, kind of that area. And I've been thinking like, how do I research this? But that's a really good point. Just consuming all of the pop culture that was going on then tells you
Yeah,
so much about the period more than just, reading a research article.
yeah, absolutely. Also, something that's I think really cool is because I did it that way. I have a pop culture book from every decade, and it was helpful, but it wasn't as fun.
Yeah.
And so something else I do is I'll go through and I'll read just newspaper headlines and stuff like that from that era. And sometimes it was really stupid, random shit. Like, this whole block is having a cookout. We do it every year, but it's like, okay, that's part of that culture. We don't
Mhm.
see that as much today. We get
Mhm.
our packages and our food delivered to our door and then we tuck back in. Like, so it really
Yeah.
does help you understand the culture and the language of those times.
Hmm. Totally. Well, let me ask you this. So, this is an awesome list of movies, and like I said, it makes me want to go watch all of them. But for people who want something a little bit more contemporary, are there any recent movies that you think capture kind of the same magic as some of these oldies?
Yes, and there's actually a director who I think captures some of this.
Even
And
better.
yeah, and I'm sure you've seen him though, so sorry to disappoint. I think it's Ty West. I think Ty West is a really great director and writer, and I think he captures that campiness because what's brilliant about X and Pearl and Maxine is there are these horrific, horrific, extremely violent things happening, but instead of going into like the super dark suspense and it's so intense and it's whatever, it starts to go campy. Like, it's so campy that Pearl is yelling in some dead guy's face that she's a star or that she's a sex symbol or something like that. Like it's funny. You're supposed to laugh, and it's awesome because back then in the 50s, people would laugh at these gimmicks and be like, "Oh shit," but I'm kind of scared. And that's what you do when you're watching Pearl or Maxine. You're like, "Ah, that was so goofy," and then you're like, "I'm terrified. She's terrifying." And so I think Ty West really, really captures that you can do horror really dark and you can do it really suspenseful, but there's always room for that campiness. And I think that that is kind of like an ode to the oldies.
That's awesome. I mean, I actually haven't seen those movies, so I have
You're in
not
for
seen a
a
lot of movies
treat.
lately. Yeah, I need to add those to my list. I have two kids under the age of 4, so movies have just not
Oh,
been a thing for the past 4 years, but
yeah.
I really want to watch those now.
Yeah, you have to. And if you end up enjoying them or if you want to do it beforehand, there are actually brilliant, brilliant novelizations of the whole X trilogy. And I really liked them because you get a little bit more internal dialogue from the characters. And so it just kind of made me love those movies even more. My favorite one in that collection is Pearl, and that's the second film. Yeah, Pearl is my absolute favorite. If you watch them, try to watch them close together because
Mhm.
even though they all take place in a different era, which is also cool,
That is cool.
um, Yeah, like Pearl, I think is 1940s, which is cool because people are like wearing masks because of the like Spanish influenza, and then you're like, what, you're taken out of it. You think it's COVID again for a second.
Mhm.
But Pearl is so campy. It's so fun. So is X. I mean, Kid Cudi's in it, but it's brilliant. It's well done horror. It has this beautiful arc and it's super creepy and off putting, but then it's campy at the same time. So it really takes you through a range of emotions.
Right on. Okay, I literally writing that down right now so I don't forget. And I get this, I'm going to ask you a question that I get a lot too, because you said you don't live in an area where people like horror. I'm kind of the same way. It's just
Yeah,
people around me are like, I want to support you, Viggy, but I don't really like to be scared. But
yeah.
what do you say to someone who says they just don't like horror?
I would tell them that they probably haven't experienced it. And excuse me, what they would probably say is, yeah, like my brother used to play it and it scared me, or my friend showed me Scream at like a sleepover, because that's how it happened for my sister. Was literally she saw Scream. I think she was probably like 7 years old when she saw Scream for the first time, which might have been a bit too young.
Mm,
So the garage scene in Scream like scarred her for a long time, and she swore off horror. And now she reads horror books all the time. That's basically what she reads, horror and historical horror. Um, and so I would tell people you have to experience horror willingly. It needs to be consensual. Like it's
mm,
no one's gonna have fun with horror if all you're trying to do is scare them. You have to show them the good in it too. And you have to show them that it's worth being scared because you get something on the other side. And so if you're only introducing them to the fear, they're like, oh, that's awful. Why would I want to put myself through that? And that kind of thing. And that's what I bring up a lot with the movie like Midsummer is
mhm.
you have to you have to experience kind of the other emotions and the terror, but you know there's something on the other side of it. And so I think you have to pick something that doesn't have any of your immediate triggers. Like if someone is terrified of bugs, don't show them like any spider movies or things like that off the top, right away or something like that. So I think all these movies are safe choices because they're not so graphic, obviously. They're not so visually bloody. They're more focused on shadows and sounds and kind of old tricks, gimmicks to get the horror across. So I think any of these all these horror movies would be a really great place to start. And I think people would find they have a lot more fun with them than they would think.
I would totally agree with that because some of them you watch them, they don't scare you, but they give you something else. I don't even know
Yes.
how to describe that. It's like a comfort. It's like a window into the past. It's an escape. It's
Yes.
something that, newer movies don't necessarily focus on anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I think we all have our see, I say my comfort horror movies and people will laugh at me, but I say that to people in the community and like, oh, what are your comfort horror movies?
Yes, what are they? I'm actually curious because I have one.
Oh, that's awesome. So probably my number one is The Conjuring. I love The Conjuring. It's a comforting horror movie to me. That doesn't mean it doesn't scare me. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean I'm not like, she's up on that chipper robe or whatever that's called, and it's scary. The colors are so comforting. I love the use of color, darkness, and kind of those beigey colors back then,
Hmm.
which really inspired Take Your Turn, Teddy. And so I think I love that. I think the kind of use of lighting, like I said, the just the dark and light kind of contrast is moody, really moody, and it works. And then Sleepy Hollow, that's another comfort horror for me.
Nice. Mine would be the original It and The Shining. Oh, and
Yes.
Rose
Oh, The
Red.
Shining.
Rose Red is a really good comfort horror movie for me.
I've never seen Rose Red. Is that based on Rose Madder?
No, actually, I don't think it's even based on a book, but it is Stephen King. And it was
Okay.
a TV miniseries. Gosh, I think it came out when I was like seven, so in the late 90s. So good.
Okay. Does that
Incredibly
have the
long, so good.
does that have the actress who plays Marnie in Halloween Town? Because I might have like
Yes.
stumbled on it on Amazon Prime.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I'll watch it. See, this is the best. It's so fun talking to people who love horror and you leave with like a little watch list and reading list. So I'll watch
100%.
it. And you have to watch the X series and
Yes,
let
the
me know
X
what you
trilogy,
think.
circling it right now. Yes, I will do that. Okay. Well, thank you so much. This has really been super interesting. I feel like I love talking about horrors of the decades too, and I think it's just not something that a lot of people think about. So,
Yeah,
so nice to have somebody super knowledgeable to talk about that with.
thank you. I enjoyed this conversation immensely, and I'm definitely going to watch Rose Red.
Yes. I want to know what you think. And
I
then
will. I'll let you know.
lastly, where can people find your work and keep up with you?
Okay. So on Instagram and TikTok, I'm pretty active there. Like I said, I'll be sharing my cover reveal soon for the film you're about to see. And I am at Haley Newlin underscore author across social media. And like I said, I post regularly. I post kind of my writing routine, my inspirations. I talk about horror movies a lot, especially oldies horror movies.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.